Hi, and welcome to our Master the Workflow Assistant Editor Overview, a series of conversations about the job of the assistant editor in the film and television industry. I'm Lawrence Jordan, a veteran editor with over 50 film and television credits, and co-creator of Master the Workflow. I'm joined by my partner and former assistant editor, Richard Sanchez. Richard, too, is a highly experienced editor in his own right and has worked on numerous features and television shows as an assistant and a visual effects editor. These videos are based on our flagship course, Feature Film Assistant Editor Immersion, and are intended to give those interested in a career in editing an overview of the knowledge and skills required to be a successful assistant editor in the professional arena. Okay, another important skill set that assistant editors are going to need to have in their toolbox is the ability to create temp sound effects tracks and temp visual effects. Now, of course, this stuff will get replaced by the final, visual effects people and sound team. But as you go, quite often, there's so much film that the editor is having to wade through that they really need a hand, even if it's just a small part, maybe just backgrounds or something, in temp effects. So Richard's got a lot of experience with that because I made him do temp sound and visual effects all the time. So why don't you tell us about that, Rich?
Temp sound and visual effects, I find sound more so is one of those things too where depending on your editor, I know I've worked with some editors who really like to be in control of their sound and they would rather do sound work than give it to me. And some editors will really lean on you heavily, just sound effect the whole thing. And it's interesting too because temp sound can be a very subjective thing. Some editors really just want you to tell the story, move it along, and some will want you to build a full environment. Your ability to do that is really going to come down to your familiarity with your sound effects library and also your organization of your sound effects library and the metadata. And one trick that I like to use is I use iTunes, and I use that to be able to just sample sound effects very quickly. It's just a really handy way of working really fast. There's other great programs out there, SoundMiner, and there was a program called Cellar, which is also for organizing sound effects. And it's really important. The other good trick with sound effects is I find sound effects is often a game of how can you ask for the same thing as many different ways as possible. And what I mean by that is when you're asked for a whoosh, and I promise you're going to be asked for whooshes in your career. Sometimes it's called a swish. Sometimes it's called jet blast or a jet engine. Sometimes it's going to be wind. And so you go, okay, so I can ask, because you're searching through your sound effects library. How can I type the same thing as many different ways? Because you'll go, I want a whoosh. That's not a whoosh. What is that? That's and I find for me, that is often the mindset I have to get into with building sound effects, especially when I'm not getting the right sound effect. The other trick I'll give you is sometimes you're searching and you're searching and you're searching and nothing is working. I bought a little portable recorder, a little Zoom recorder. Sometimes it is better to just quickly do your own temp Foley than it is to actually search for a sound effect that's just not working. Especially footstep sound effects, I find. Right. There are always floor shine shoes on wooden decks, which is great if we're talking about high noon, but nobody walks like that. As an aside. And moving on to temp visual effects, that's a big thing. If you're on a big film that has a visual effects editor as the assistant editor, you'll probably be doing very little temp VFX. And if you're working on a film that doesn't have one, you'll probably be doing them all. And that is, visual effects are a rabbit hole. I'm personally an advocate for doing visual effects in the Avid as much as humanly possible. And I'm not going to look at the Avid with rose-colored glasses. It's can be quite trying at times doing visual effects in the Avid. There's a lot of things that are more difficult than they really should be, but there's a lot of distinct advantages of keeping your visual effects in the Avid as opposed to bringing them out. Now, that said, if you're coming up against a preview and you're not going to be getting a shot back from your vendor and you just need to do something more robust than what the Avid is giving you, then of course, go out to After Effects, if you're simply doing a really heavy effect lot of layers, and Avid is just not going to cut it. You can go back out to After Effects. The thing that happens with that is you just have to make sure you're tracking all of those assets, because once you render out to After Effects and bring it back into Avid, it's a new piece of media. So as long as you're tracking it, you'll be in good shape. And visual effects, again, is a rabbit hole unto itself. There's a world of plugins and techniques and, all sorts of things, but that's a pretty important thing for an assistant editor to be able to do.
Absolutely. Thanks, Richard. Okay, in the last lesson in this section, Richard and I are going to talk about something assistant editors have to do on a regular basis, and that's making outputs.